Hi, sister.
Hello.
All right. Well, here's our first podcast. It's a long time coming.
Welcome to the show. This is Twisted and Mysterious, a podcast. That's what it's called.
Sure is.
About true crime and mystery things.
All of the mystery things.
The most mysterious things
that we can find. Okay. So, well, our first story, we kind of didn't want to go with like all of the big regular ones that everybody hears all the time, like the Bundys and the Dahmers, but we wanted to do something that was, I don't know, kind of hit close to home, I guess.
And I mean, I think that every town probably has some sort of crime that people know about. And I don't know how much other people from our hometown know about this crime, but it was definitely one that affected our childhood.
Absolutely. And so where this story started for us is with the kidnapping and murder of Dina Lynn Gore in 1986. And I had just turned 4 that summer.
I was a teeny tiny baby.
Faren was a teeny tiny baby. And, you know, this was something that colored our entire childhoods. I mean, anytime we wanted to go anywhere, it was always, well, remember that Dina went missing, going to Allsup's.
Yeah. It was, don't wander off too far on your own or you're going to end up like this.
And so, July 1986, like I said, Dina went missing. She was 9 years old. She was riding her bike to Allsup's, which is a local convenience store in this area. And 5 days later, after a massive multi-jurisdictional search, she was found dead in a shallow grave on a ranch about 70 miles outside of Artesia. We're in New Mexico, sorry. I mean, and like I said, and we said, this completely changed how parents behaved with their children in this area.
Definitely at our house. I don't know how much everybody else did, but it shaped the way that our mother let us go places.
Yeah, well, and I had even read an article from the Artesia newspaper at the time that this all was going on, where, people were meeting at the Tasty Freeze or, the Little League fields or whatever, and, they were talking about this is our safe town, and now, kids aren't getting an automatic yes whenever they wanted to go somewhere.
Right, and this was the 80s, so it was still pretty lax as far as, letting your kids go and do things by themselves.
Right. So, like I said, the story started for us talking about the story of Dina Lynn Gore. But what I found as I started looking into this more, because, as kids, we just heard, Dina went kidnapped and she was murdered. And there actually was so much more that went into the story that I didn't even realize was part of this. So this kind of actually turned into the story of her murderer, who's Terry Clark. So let's talk about him for a minute. He was born May 17th, 1956 in Roswell, New Mexico. He was one of 5 kids that was born to Calvin Clark and Vera Lobley. His dad worked for the city of Roswell as an engineer and the superintendent of streets. From everything that I read, it was just like a normal childhood. They weren't rich or anything, but they lived in a nice house. They didn't
Right. And you hear that a lot, that, they don't necessarily come from terrible upbringings. It's just something that happens.
Right. I didn't hear it, anything that was talked about, his dad. His dad was a really nice guy. I didn't see anything about his mom or anything. But so he went to Goddard High School. He dropped out his junior year. I had seen in one source that he had possibly been suspended for truancy, and then he just didn't go back.
Decided to stay truant.
But former teachers and classmates that were interviewed after his arrest, they just described him as quiet. He wasn't in any trouble. He was a tall, skinny, nerd. He wasn't really, memorable. After he dropped out, he earned his GED and went to work for a bus building company that was out at the base in Roswell. And then at the age of 20, he joined the Navy. So this was April 1976, and he served his 4 years, and then he was honorably discharged. When he came back to Roswell, he met a woman named Dana, and they got married. In June 1980, he began working for the city of Roswell as an apprentice carpenter, and he worked there until his arrest in 1984. He lived in a, quote, respectable neighborhood west of downtown. He was earning about $1,200 a month, which an inflation calculator told me that was about $4,500 now. They had 2 children, a girl in 1981 and a boy in 1983. And at the time of his first arrest, they were toddlers. And he didn't have any prior law trouble that was reported. I think there was one thing like over some marijuana seeds or something. It wasn't a big deal. So in 1984, though, something happened. Like, I don't. So this is kind of like where his crimes started, per se. October 7th, a woman named Cynthia Fernandez reported that at about 6 p.m., a man in a white car parked in front of her house and stared at her daughter through the window. And that she said that she stared him down until he drove away like 20 to 30 minutes later. Like he just stared in her house for 20 minutes. And
get a hobby, guy.
Right. And like later, after all of the stuff about Terry came out in the newspaper, she and her husband realized that it was Terry Clark who worked. His job was next to her husband's job. And so they had met, talked, and had conversations and stuff. So I guess he knew about their family. The next day, October 8th, Donita Welch, who was 6 years old, so she's a teeny tiny little thing, was walking home from school to her grandmother's house. It was about 2:45 p.m., and I guess she and her brother would cut through an alley. And a man in a blue and white car drove up behind her and grabbed her. Her older brother was walking the same route, but he was like 2 blocks behind her. And so he didn't see it happen, but when he got up to where she was snatched, he found her jacket. And Donita, as an adult, has said that she has blocked a lot of the memories, which is totally understandable.
Right. This kidnapping, or whatever you want to call it, didn't end in a way that Dina Lingor's did.
No, it didn't. So, yeah, Donita thankfully made it through this. But she said that she remembers being pushed out of the car in a field west of town, bloody, half naked, and terrified. And she's 6, like teeny tiny little thing. So it was just 30 minutes later, she was found walking in the 600 block of South Lee, where a couple called the police. And it was determined that during the attack, she was sexually molested. She was taken to St. Mary's Hospital, where she told the police that her attacker was a white man about the age of her father, who drove, quote, a little white and blue car with baby stuff inside. And I guess they asked her what she meant by baby stuff, and she said the things that babies sit in. And so there were 2 car seats in the back, which is understandable because he has 2 babies. Another thing I wrote down, apparently she had told them that he was wearing a blue and white striped shirt and blue pants. And I was like, is matching his car.
Yeah.
Just a look, I guess.
He had a certain taste.
I guess. Well, and later he drives another white and blue car, so I guess that's just his colors. So 2 days after the attack, an article ran in the Roswell Daily Record with a physical description of the man in the car. One witness recalled a white car with blue stripes zooming past at 3:15 p.m. Another witness said that the car was a white Camaro Z28. Calls and tips were coming in like the day of the incident, even before the article ran in the newspaper. But Roswell, even still as big as it is still pretty close-knit community, so everybody knows everybody.
It's still got a very small-town mentality.
Right. So those were already coming in. And so apparently Terry Clark was already like on the radar even before any of this happened, because he also happened to own a white Camaro with blue stripes and a blue interior that had 2 baby seats in the back. And he also happened to have called out of work sick that day. And so the sheriff showed up at his house that day and said he was investigating the rape of a 6-year-old girl found wandering on the edge of town naked with a lacerated vagina, and that Clark's car matched the description. And I was like reading that and I was thinking, it's a lot of information to tell to somebody that you're just questioning about a crime.
Right.
But that's what it was. So
that's a lot of information for a person of interest.
Exactly. So during the investigation, like I said, it was found out that he had called out of sick work that day. And he was home after 4 p.m. because I guess his boss stopped by to talk to him. And when the police questioned him that first day, they looked at his car, and the passenger seat and floorboard were wet, and the floor mat was hanging on the fence, and the whole rest of his car was dry. And so I guess they thought that was a little weird. But he wasn't arrested for 9 more days. Also, I guess when this came out, an 18-year-old girl came forward and said that on September 29th, so even before he was like peeping in that one lady's window, a man in a blue and white car tried to force her into his car at gunpoint on a dark street corner in Roswell, but she was able to escape unharmed, she said, due to traffic in the area. And so she, I guess, had recognized the description that Donita had given to the newspaper, and so she came forward and was like, hey, this guy tried to take me too. So Wednesday, October 10th, and then the following Monday, Donita was taken to a hypnotist to try and help her remember what happened. The weird thing about this hypnotist is he wasn't a hypnotist. So it says that he was a PI, a private investigator.
So just a guy they gave a stopwatch to, and
guy, yeah. So he, I don't know how would you say polygrapher or polygrapher?
I have no idea.
I don't know. I keep saying it polygrapher in my head because it seems to make more sense.
It reminds me of polygamist.
It does. But so he's not a psychologist. He's not a psychiatrist.
Just a guy with a stopwatch.
A guy with a stopwatch. So they have him.
Or a pocket watch, rather.
Yeah, there it is. You're getting very sleepy. So, surprise, they're unable to figure anything out. And I don't know why they use this guy.
Hypnotism was just not hypnotizing.
It was not. So an article in the Albuquerque Journal said that Donita, quote, was frightened, agitated, and uncooperative, and she cried and said she wanted to go home.
She's 6. And had some really terrible things happen to her.
And I mean, and also like this comes back to haunt them in the appeals that they used some random guy with a pocket watch. They almost said stopwatch. So that Wednesday, she was shown a photo array of 9 men, and she picked Terry Clark out, and he was arrested at 10 p.m. that night. He was charged with criminal sexual penetration, kidnapping, and attempted kidnapping in the case of the 18-year-old woman. The other weird thing I thought about this is, like, in everything that I read, I mean, it's neither here nor there, I guess, but that woman was never named. Like, and she's 18. So it wasn't like she was a minor. I don't know why. Like, because you would think it would be in, like, police records or something. And especially if they were going to go to trial over it. But
yeah, I don't know if she asked to have her name left out of the media or what, but
possibly. So October 18th, Terry Clark was arraigned before the magistrate judge, John McLemore, and held on a $150,000 bond. His preliminary hearing was scheduled for November 20th in the district court before Judge Paul Sneed, who becomes probably a big player in all of this. On November 14th, Judge Sneed reduced Clark's bond to only $50,000, and he was released after serving only 27 days with the following conditions. Please pay careful attention to these conditions because they come up a lot. So he had to post a $50,000 appearance bond, have no contact with the victim or members of the victim's families, maintain contact with his public defender, not leave the state without written permission from the court, and not be physically present inside Roswell city limits except for court appearances, conferences with attorney, and such appearances as are necessary to his defense. So basically, pay this bond, stay away from the little girl and her family.
And leave Roswell.
Yeah.
Go be somebody else's problem.
Right. It's just, I don't know if that's like a common thing. Like I
don't know. I've never been a criminal.
I've never been a criminal either. Okay, so he left Roswell. He went to stay with his older brother, Steve, on the Squaw Valley Ranch, which is southwest of Roswell, where his brother worked for a cattle company. If you're from the area or know the area, this is 62 miles northwest of Artesia, north of Hope. So Artesia is south of Roswell. This ranch is kind of in between and to the west, so kind of triangulate that way. So Donita's trial, the trial for her attack started on May 31st, 1985. It lasted only 5 days. On June 4th, Clark was found guilty of first-degree criminal sexual penetration and first-degree kidnapping. The trial for the 18-year-old that he had attempted to kidnap, it fell apart. Like the whole case fell apart because Judge Sneed said that they couldn't bring any information from Danita Welch's trial up in her trial, and there really wasn't any evidence without that. And so that kind of went away, but he was found guilty for attacking Jonita. He was released on his $50,000 bond with the same conditions: pay the bond,
stay away from this family, and get out of Roswell.
Yeah. During the so he was released pending sentencing, and then during the sentencing hearing, his father, his brother Steve, his wife, and a longtime friend testified on his behalf. There were several letters of recommendation sent on his behalf. On June 27th, he was sentenced to 24 years with credit for the 27 days served. Judge Sneed, he allowed Clark to be released on his bond again, pending his appeal. And so to Judge Sneed's credit, giving him some credit here, the law in New Mexico at the time was that criminals were bonded basically automatically unless they were being charged with first-degree murder.
Right.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. There are some other pretty terrible crimes that people shouldn't be, released on the public with.
So she's attacked in October. He served 27 days. Now we're in June of the following year, and he's only served 27 days out of all of this, and he's sentenced to 24 years. But instead of going to prison, he's released again because of his appealing the case.
Right.
And part of the appeal was Mr. Hypnotist, and like some other
Officer Pocket Watch.
Yeah, Officer Pocket Watch. So let's see. Judge allowed Clark out on his bond again, pending appeal, despite the DA requesting that his bond be denied because his release would be traumatic for his victim. Additionally, the DA pointed out that Clark had already violated the conditions of his bond because he had been seen within Roswell city limits on personal business at least twice. The DA said that he brought this up, but it fell on deaf ears. And a lot of the things that I read was that he was given a lot of leeway because people liked his dad so much. Because his dad was like an upstanding member of the community. And
you can be an upstanding member of the community all day long. That doesn't make your son any less of a scumbag. Right.
And so I guess that was like a big thing that people assumed was happening here, was that he was given a lot of leeway because of that. So on June 12th, 1986, the appellate court ruled against Terry Clark and upheld the judgment of the district court. But guess what? He was released again so that the Supreme Court could hear his appeal.
Right.
So it doesn't matter that all of these courts are like, this dude is super guilty.
This guy is a bad guy. Yeah. He needs to go to jail.
And they're like, but appealing. And I understand appeals. It's an important part of our...
And it's your right.
Yeah, it's your right. But also, I mean, this guy attacked a 6-year-old. And so, I don't know, maybe put some more restrictions on him.
Just let him out there, too.
Right. So the original...
Be somebody else's problem, like I said earlier.
Yeah, exactly. So the original conditions were still supposed to apply. So he went back to the ranch to live with his brother, waiting for the Supreme Court to hear his appeal. So that was June 12th of 1986. So I'm going to switch gears, and we're going to talk about Dina Lynn Gore now. So Dina was born October 12th, 1976, and this summer in 1986, she was 9 years old. She lived in Artesia with her mom, Colleen, who worked in construction, and her brother, Jeff Jr., who was 11, and her mom's boyfriend. Colleen moved the kids to Artesia from El Paso, Texas, after she had gotten divorced from the kids' father, Jeff Sr., in 1982. Jeff Sr. still lived in El Paso. He was remarried to a woman named Kathy, and in the summer of 1986, they had a baby that was a little over a year old. Colleen and the kids lived at 606 West Washington in Artesia, and at the time, Artesia had a population between 10 and 12,000, so it hasn't really changed that much. It hasn't got that much bigger. Yeah. It was a typical suburban neighborhood. Wide streets, kids riding their bikes on the streets, just like we used to do when we were kids. Dina and Jeff Jr. had been in El Paso with their father up until Tuesday, July 15th. they had possibly been living there. I saw one article that said that they had moved to Artesia with their mom when their parents got divorced, and that the kids had moved back to El Paso and had just recently moved back. So I don't know if they had been visiting or if they were living there and then moved back. But they had only been home for 2 days. Dina was just a typical kid. She played with her dolls. She had her little mini bike. She liked to ride motorcycles. She liked to paint with her grandmother. So July 17th, 1986, Dina wanted to go to Allsup's and get a Coke. And her house was about 6 blocks to the Allsup's at First Street and Park. And these aren't city blocks. These are little town blocks. So this is like half a mile. Like maybe not even that much. And basically a straight shot. Like you drive up Washington, you turn right, the Allsup's is right there. So at about 6 p.m. on July 17th, Dina, who is even barefoot, she's just like in her shorts and her tank top, and she takes off to the store. And at 7 p.m., Dina wasn't home yet. And by bicycle, this should have taken 10 minutes round trip, maybe plus the time she took in the store. So she should have been home by 7. And at 8, her family called the police. And remember, this is summertime, so the sun doesn't go down until like 9 o'clock. So it's not like it was dark or anything. And so, I mean, it's also 1986, and everybody's riding their bikes everywhere. And so but 2 hours later, she should have been home. So the police took a picture of Dina to Allsup's. The clerk said that she didn't see Dina in there at that night. And so all that night, the police searched the neighborhood and the immediate area. They found nothing. Officer Ray Faber, F-A-B-R-E, Faber,
I guess,
said that there were 3 possibilities. That 1, she was with friends and didn't realize that her family thought she was missing. 2, she was with a family member, or 3, she was abducted by a stranger. But they felt like the last one was the least likely because her bike was also missing. So I guess I kind of understand, because I guess if she was just snatched, like her bike would just be laying there. But on the other hand, like it could have just been thrown into a trunk or whatever. But her bike was still there. So the next day, a former police officer found her bicycle in a weeded lot near Allsup's. And the police chief speculated that someone had found the bike and took it, and then realized it was the one Dina had been riding, and then took it back to the area and hid it. So maybe. A Coke can was also found in the vicinity. Both of the items were sent to Roswell for fingerprints, and then were going to be sent to Albuquerque for further testing. Dina and Jeff had been fingerprinted during a community fingerprinting program. Do you remember those?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Got fingerprinted as kids often.
Yes. A lot. I know. I was thinking about that. I was like, that wasn't something we did just once.
They were preparing for us to either be kidnapped or criminals.
Well, it was like there was an epidemic of kidnapping in the 80s, it seems like. But for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, ours was like a table set up in a grocery store, and like police officers were there, and you would go up and they would fingerprint you with like the ink on the little cards. And
nowadays it's all digital.
Now it's all digital. And I don't even know if you take your kids to be fingerprinted. Like I've never taken the bear to do that.
Oh,
no. So I guess, well, anyway, so the kids had been fingerprinted. Dina and Jeff Jr. had been. And so the FBI had their fingerprints for exclusionary purposes in this case.
There were numerous opportunities, plus our aunt was a cop. And so
that's true.
She also had us fingerprinted.
That's true. For our fake arrests that she always liked to perform on us.
Yes.
So the police continued to do house by house, street by street searches. They were checking with family and friends, school, even though it was summertime. They were like checking with everybody. They couldn't find her. Jeff Sr. and his wife came to town. Colleen's parents came to town. They're still looking. The FBI gets involved. Officers from Roswell, the Eddy County Mounted Patrol, which I didn't even know we had. Or maybe
do we still?
I don't know. I was curious about that.
But you didn't Google it.
I didn't Google it. Wow. You would think that I hadn't lived with the internet for the last 20 years.
I need to know something. I guess I'll never know.
I'll never know.
I wish there was some way to find this out.
You know, though, what I was thinking about earlier, and it kind of pertains to that, is that, and I'll talk about this a little later, but like they have like 120 horses and riders and ATVs and people who came from all over the place, like as far away as like Hatch, to help search for her. There was no like Facebook outcry or text messaging chain or anything like that. This was literally just calling people and them calling people and them calling people.
And word of mouth.
And being able to gather that many people on such short notice to come from so far away to help search for this little girl. Okay, so the FBI, the state police had helicopters searching by air. Paul Vest, the boyfriend of Colleen, he went out south of town to search near Lake McMillan. People from Santa Fe were coming to help search county roads. Some volunteers from Albuquerque brought bloodhounds down to help search around the area. This was like a weird story. So it said that they came in the middle of the night. And at 3 a.m., they picked up her scent, Dina's scent, at her house. And it led to a dead end at a home of an unidentified city employee. The person allowed the officers to search his home and property, but turned up nothing. And I don't know, like, nothing else was ever said about this, and maybe it meant nothing. But it was just, like, super weird. And then I thought about it, and I was like, well, when we were kids, we would go to random neighbors' houses. And so maybe at some point she had gone to, like, visit this guy or something. I don't know.
Because we had old neighbors that we would go to their houses to do just random things.
But that was the only scent they picked up. So, like I was saying about the horses and the riders, so July 21st, the police had asked for volunteers to come. There were 120 of them. They gathered at 7:30 in the morning. And these people were ranged in age from 13 to 80 years old. And they were divided into teams. They were sent to search the 40 square mile area of Northwest Eddy County. But also at this point, the police not from the immediate area and even local police were being called back to do local things. Like they couldn't just keep like doing all of this. And so the police were like being super heavily reliant on volunteers at this point to help search for her. And so electric company workers and oil field workers were checking in areas that they were familiar to. Farmers were mowing ditches. And then the FBI became more involved because they were like, well, it's been more than 24 hours, so it's possible she was taking over state lines. So Tuesday, July 22nd, I think we're 5 days past when she went missing. And Chief McKenzie gave an update on suspects. He said that they checked people, but they had alibis, and their list seemed to be growing instead of diminishing.
Right. They weren't ruling anybody out.
Right. Like, I mean, they were ruling some people out, but then it was like they were like more names were being added to their list. And at this point, of course, they're sure it's an abduction now because they would have found her otherwise. But they thought it was an isolated incident because things like this don't happen in a small town, you know? And so they were like, you know, and they don't think she ran away and, you know, nothing like that. So they had more horseback riders come and check like the south part of Eddy County. But this same day, so we're on July 22nd, Terry Clark's brother Steve visited the Chaves County Sheriff's Office with a tip. He said he had left town on July 17th to go to Hondo to like a cattle auction or something, and he left Terry on the ranch by himself. And when he returned on Tuesday the 22nd, he noticed that in the area of the ranch where they bury dead livestock, there was fresh digging and that the tractor was left where it had been digging. And Steve also noticed a vulture and a strong odor coming from the site. And he had just learned of Dina's kidnapping because he had been gone.
Right.
So he just got back. And so he said, I guess he immediately went to the sheriff's office.
You don't have a phone with the internet on it. And so.
Me either, apparently. Officers were sent to the scene, and they uncovered the body of Dina in a shallow grave. The original affidavit filed by the DA's office stated, quote, physical evidence showed death to be a homicide consistent with sexual abuse. And basically, this meant that Dina was found naked with her hands and her feet bound. She had died from 3 gunshot wounds in close to her head. And her bindings they said were odd, but never explained. It said one of her wrists had bindings, but the other didn't. And her legs were bound, but they weren't bound together. Terry was arrested at 3 p.m. after determining that he was one of only few people who would have had access to that area of the ranch. After his arrest, Terry claimed that on July 17th, he had been on the ranch from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., and then he went to the house to eat dinner and watch TV. And he hadn't been in Artesia since July 9th because he didn't have any friends or relatives in the city. And
which we also know to be untrue.
We also know that to be untrue. And I was about to say, the police were quick to quash his alibi because guess what? Terry had a girlfriend who lived in Artesia.
Yes.
And so she lived just a block away from the Gore's house. Right. And he had been seen visiting her on July 17th, the date that Dina went missing, until about 5:30. And she even gave testimony that he had been there until she went to work.
So he's living with his brother, and he has a girlfriend that we know of. Did he and his wife get divorced, or is he?
So I have it a little while later, but she did divorce him. It says...
because she was, defending him during his first
right.
case, so
in June of 1985, when he was being sentenced for Donita Welch's kidnapping and rape, she had said that she would stick by him and give him all of her love and support. But in late May or early June of 1986, she divorced him.
She changed her mind.
She big fat changed her mind.
Good for her.
Yeah, because I also was like, he has a girlfriend, but he also has a wife with two kids.
And two children.
Yeah,
and that happens, but
it sure does. And at some point, he had claimed that she was having an affair, and so he started seeing other women. And none of that was corroborated. But so he has a girlfriend,
right,
in Artesia, and she testified that he was at her house until she went to work at about 5:30. And then later that night, he was seen at a bar that I guess Artesia used to have called the Country Connection after 10:30 p.m.
Right.
And so the time between 5:30 and 10:30 is unaccounted for. And so the Squaw Valley Ranch, is that what I called it?
Something like that.
It's kind of far out of town, but it's not that far. In 5 hours, he could have easily been there and back. Multiple times, yeah. So... also, several people had also stated that they had seen Clark in Artesia multiple times between July 9th and 17th. He had a girlfriend and he had friends there. Mr. I don't have any friends there. And Chief McKenzie reported to the press that apparently in the weeks leading up to Dina's disappearance, there had been several reports of young girls being harassed while riding bikes or walking, but they couldn't determine if there was a connection until an 11-year-old girl came forward and said that a man in a blue and white International Scout near 33rd and Grand had chased her on July 14th, which was 3 days before Dina went missing.
33rd is kind of out in the boonies.
It is, yeah. It is kind of far out there. Past where Teresa lived.
Mm-hmm. It's closer to where, our mom and them grew up.
Oh, true. Yeah.
Out on 42nd Street.
Yeah. But, that would have been out on the way to the ranch, too. Mm-hmm. If he was going out towards Hope. And also another blue and white car.
Mm-hmm.
His car
sort
of choice.
Of his MO.
Yeah. So, and witnesses did put Clark in Artesia on July 14th. And she picked him out of a photo array as well.
Right.
So he was also harassing children even then. He was arraigned in magistrate court on July 23rd on charges of first-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping. And guess what?
I bet they let him go.
They didn't. They didn't this time.
No. This time.
He was finally being held without bond because remember, you didn't have to bond somebody if it was first-degree murder.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
this time he killed somebody.
That's right. The charges also made him eligible for the death penalty. And the state medical examiner also confirmed the identity of Dina on Wednesday. Also, conveniently or ironically or whatever we want to say, so remember he was free pending appeal to the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. Well, the day after Dina was found, the Supreme Court upheld the conviction on the first one. It was like, if you could have done that, a week ago.
Months ago.
Yeah, at least a week ago.
One of the many times he went to court over this, then, he wouldn't have been murdering little girls or harassing other little girls. Or,
right.
Like I said, they made him somebody else's problem. And
mm-hmm. And that is also something that comes up later. So now they're sure Terry Clark's the bad guy, right? And they start looking for evidence tying him to the crime. They have eyewitnesses that put him in Artesia right before the kidnapping. And so He's visiting his girlfriend. And so randomly, and I'll let Faren talk about this, but all of our lives, we've heard this story, right?
Right.
I don't know. You want to go ahead?
Well, this case, like we said, was something that our mother brought up our entire lives to, as like a cautionary tale not to wander off. And then, it's been a while, but we were talking to her about wanting to cover this case. And it turns out that the girl that Terry Clark was dating during this murder was my mother's cousin.
Yeah.
And somehow, in all the years that our mother used this story as a cautionary tale, she never one time said, oh, yeah, my cousin was dating the murderer.
Yeah. And not only that, but Jackie, our uncle, so he was a talker, and he told us stories all the time, and he had a penchant for telling us the same stories over and over again. And one night, like not long before he had died, he was talking to us about this, and he like brought up, like, just very casually, oh yeah, like I used to hang out with Terry Clark. And I was just like, I didn't really like push it at the time. And like now I'm like, tell me more. But
unfortunately, he can't because he's passed away himself.
But he probably hung out with them because they were all close with their cousins. And so since she was dating him, they probably hung out.
They probably met through their cousin who was dating the murderer.
Right. And so, like we said, she lived like half a block away from the Gore house. And they did search her house and, talk to her and everything. And they don't think that she had anything to do with it.
I don't think she had any idea that her boyfriend was this scumbag.
No. And unfortunately, her house just happened to put him into close proximity to this poor little girl.
Well, and what I think is scary is that she had little girls.
She did. She had two little girls.
Because her children are older than us.
Yeah. Not much.
No, but they were. And so she had two little girls at the time.
They would have been between like ours and Dina's ages. Like, so they would have been little girls.
I mean, I know they're both older than I am, but I don't know how close to your age they are.
Yeah, I think one of them is my age and the other one might be like 2 or 3 years older than me. But yeah, so it's crazy to us that it turned out to be even closer to home.
Yeah, like it was already close
murder.
To home, being in our hometown and being something that, as I've said multiple times, our mother used as a cautionary tale. But then it turns out that this was, our family knew this guy.
Yeah, it's so crazy. And like mom doesn't appear to have known him. Like
she just knows that her cousin was dating him.
Yeah. So, like I said, the Supreme Court said that they were upholding the original conviction for Donita's kidnapping and rape, and he was finally sent to prison. He was sent to the Western New Mexico Correctional Facility in Grants to begin serving his sentence while awaiting trial for Dina's murder. His defense attorney, William Fry, was attempting to get a change of venue due to public outrage. And people were outraged because if he hadn't been bonded out of all of this stuff and also been told, stay out of Roswell, go be somebody else's problem, this wouldn't have happened, right? And so I read a quote from his defense attorney that says, it is a quantum leap to say, as the argument is developing now, that if the judge had never let Mr. Clark out on bond, the little girl would never have been killed. And like, I know at this point, he hasn't been convicted of Dina's murder, so innocent until proven guilty. But the whole fact of the matter is if he hadn't been released, if he had been sent to prison like he should have been sent, Dina wouldn't have been killed. And that's just all there is to that. I mean,
it's, cut and dry.
It very much is. So it was crazy, though, because even after his arrest, he had friends who were giving statements to the press saying that he didn't believe he was guilty of Donita's kidnapping and rape, and that the press was treating him unfairly and the publicity was unfair. Quote, because worse crimes happen all the time without all of the press. Like, so that doesn't make this less bad.
Right. Plus,
it was a 6-year-old little girl. So, and a 9-year-old little girl. So, but I mean, as far as the Donita one goes, because they all, like, he maintained his innocence on that until the very end. He said that he didn't do it. So, I don't know. But he was convicted of it, so there's that. And in the meantime, Artesia and Roswell are reeling. And like we talked about at the beginning, there was a quote in the Artesia Daily News that said, "Parents fear for their children now. No longer does the child who wants to ride a bike to a friend's house a couple of blocks away receive an automatic yes." Which, again, we experienced firsthand. There were lots of protests being performed throughout the counties, trying to change the laws that allowed a convicted sex offender from being free on bail pending his appeals. Also, I learned that the law that makes it where you have to know that sex offenders live in your area is Megan's Law. That didn't come out until 1996. So even at this point, even then, like, you wouldn't have known because there was no registry. You didn't have to tell people. And he wasn't living in the area anyway. So, I don't know that would have done anything anyway.
Right, because he wasn't living, like, in close proximity to the area where it happened.
Right.
He drove all the way into town to do it.
Exactly. So his preliminary hearing began Tuesday, August 9th, 1986. An expert from the state crime lab testified that because Dina's body had been so badly decomposed when she was found, it was estimated that she had been dead for 4 days to a week when she was found, and she was missing for 5 days. Another expert testified that the rope taken from Terry's truck matched the rope on Dina's ankle. And at the end of the preliminary hearing, Magistrate Billy V. Carpenter ruled that Clark would stand trial for first-degree murder and was ordered bound over for trial. He was also eligible for the death penalty, which I know we talked about already. So October 9th, 1986, the state Supreme Court changed rules allowing for the unconditional release of a convicted offender appealing his or her case. So that was one good thing that came out of all of that. The new rule gave district judges authority to deny release if there was a flight risk or if the offender posed a danger to people in the community. Governor Tony Anaya at the time, he was a Democrat governor. He was known to be very liberal and anti-death penalty. On November 27th, he commuted all the death convictions for all of the people who were currently on death row. There were like 5 of them. So that was November 27th, right? So a few days later, December 4th, Terry Clark pleaded guilty to the first-degree murder and kidnapping of Dina Gore, which surprised everybody because, so what happened was that Governor Anaya was about to leave office. He had already been, he's at the end of his term. Another governor's already been elected. Governor Anaya commutes all of these death sentences. And so the plan with Terry Clark and his attorneys where he would plead guilty, he would be sentenced to the death penalty, and then the governor would commute his sentence to life in prison. So they were trying to finagle this so that he didn't get the death sentence. So the judge, though, decided, was on to their scheme. And he told the defense team that the earliest Clark would be sentenced would be the end of January, which was after Tony and I left office. And the defense team was mad, and they tried to appeal it, and they were like, no, you have to give us a quick and speedy, sentencing or whatever. But that was denied by the Supreme Court. So the sentencing hearing began on April 26, 1987. The medical examiner detailed the state of Dina's body when she was found. The defense team introduced their theory that Clark had actually suffered a head injury right before assaulting Donita Welch that altered his entire personality.
He bumped his head.
Bro, he bonked his head on the roof of his car.
I do that all the time, and I...
You haven't murdered anybody yet?
No one.
So, yeah, he bonked his head on his car, and apparently that turned him into a murderer. So he also claimed that he was traumatized by an incident in the Navy where a young girl died in his arms while his ship was attempting to save them from pirates.
So, there are pirates.
There are pirates, but I went back. I found an article from 1979. It was in the newspaper under military news, and it talks about him and his, what do you call it? The people you serve with. I don't know. Anyway, they rescued 3 boatloads of Vietnamese refugees in the South China Sea, But nothing talks about pirates. It just talks about finding these people, and some of them had been without water for weeks, and, but there was nothing about pirates.
The only word I can think of is battalion, but I don't know if
think
that's
it's
the correct word.
Wow, we are military people. Can you tell? So anyway, so that was all I could find. I didn't see anything talking about that he had saved people from pirates. So during his sentencing, they also called on Reverend Larry Foster, whom Clark had spoke to of his crimes. And Reverend Foster said that Clark asked him if he thought a person could be possessed by a demon, quote, because he said he had a terrible urge to see the child's genitals. He also admitted to the Reverend that he raped Dina, and then she started screaming, "You're going to pay for this." And so he, quote, panicked and reached inside of the car for a gun and shot her. Which I was just like, she was very feisty.
Right.
So at least she fought him.
Yes, at least she didn't just let it happen.
That's right. May 8th, 1987, Terry Clark was sentenced to death for the kidnap and murder of Dina Lynn Gore. The end. Just kidding. So even though he confessed to the murder to the court where he apologized to the Gore family, he confessed to a reverend. He gave an interview about how sorry he was for his crimes. In September of 1987, Terry Clark requested a new trial. You already said
I did it.
And in my humble opinion, if you're really sorry for murdering an innocent baby,
then you're willing to take your comeuppance.
Right. You caused a massive amount of trauma to this entire family. An entire community.
Town. I mean, obviously it's worse for the family, but you ruined an entire town and how they viewed letting their children.
Exactly. He changed how all parents in a community behave towards their children. You just shut your mouth and accept your sentence.
Yeah.
You did it. Just... yeah, but not Terry Clark.
No.
And
I mean, so often this happens.
Yeah, it does. And it's ridiculous. It's because again, he had the scheme, right? He was going to avoid the death penalty. Well, now he's got the death penalty, and so his scheme got messed up. In March 1989, the Supreme Court upheld his death sentence. In May 1991, he gave an interview to the Santa Fe Reporter, which was creepy. At this point, he starts to sort of deny that he did it, or at least he isn't taking responsibility for what happened. And he claims that on October 8th, 1984, talking about Donita Welch, that he stayed home sick that day. He said sheriff's deputies came to his house that afternoon investigating the rape of a 6-year-old girl. And that he states, quote, "I cooperated fully. I gave them a statement and everything. When this thing was supposed to happen, I was on the phone with my wife. They say the girl had got out of school about 2:45 in the afternoon. Supposedly she's walking along when a car stops and the driver makes her get in. He drives her way out in the country." And brace yourself because it's icky. He says, "All the guy used was his fingers on her. I'm not sure if that's rape or not." Actually, sir, it is. And you're gross for even saying that.
Right.
She's 6. She wasn't a consenting adult.
No.
She was a 6-year-old baby child. So he maintained his innocence on Donita's rape. He claimed the DA needed a scapegoat and went on to say, "I have been wrongfully convicted, losing my family and everything I owned, my job, my house. Boo-hoo-hoo. To be accused of such a terrible crime, I cannot comprehend that. I love kids.
Clearly.
I'm not a preyer on children," says the kidnapper and the raper and the murderer.
Says the predator.
Yeah. Of Dina, Clark stated, "Let's just say that with all the past events that occurred in my life that led up to this case, anything is possible. A lot of anger got misdirected at the wrong person. It wasn't like I said I was going to do this. I was at the wrong place at the wrong time." I'm sorry, you're an adult. "She was at the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm not even sure it happened, or I'm not even sure I did it," which is convenient after he confessed to it. "They're saying I wasn't..."
Well, he did bump his head.
He did bonk his nog. "They're saying I wasn't going to let the second one go on to tell on me." Actually, you told the Reverend that. "But that's all moot, man, because I'm not responsible for what happened to the first girl, nor am I responsible for what happened to the second." And I can only assume that he meant that if he hadn't been accused of the first crime, he wouldn't have done the second. I don't know. But... also, he was arrested. After he was arrested for her, it came out that he was chasing little girls around town. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. He can't say that he didn't plan to do this because obviously
right.
he was trying to find somebody to do this to. So Dina probably was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but he took her because he wanted to, because he'd been trying to take little girls for a while. So in September 1994, the state Supreme Court overturned his death sentence and ordered that he be resentenced. It said that the jury should have been told beforehand that Clark would be behind bars until at least the age of 86 if given the alternative sentence of life in prison. And, like, I don't know.
Like, what does that matter?
Right. And so it says, apparently based on how the prosecution was arguing during the original sentence, the jury reasonably could have concluded that Clark would be on the streets in as little as 10 years at the age of 41 if he had been given life in prison. And this conclusion was incorrect. So, weird side story. So, on July 18th, 1995, in an issue of the Albuquerque Tribune, there was a front page headline that read, DA, killer wanted girl's dad dead. So apparently he had been soliciting somebody to murder Jeff Gore.
Okay.
Yeah. He attempted to hire 2 undercover police officers to kill Jeff Gore. He wrote a letter stating, I want to hire you to arrange for Mr. Gore to have a fatal accident, because he knew that Gore would have had a key role in getting him sentenced to death again. He told a fellow inmate that he wanted Gore out of the way. And then that dude told authorities, and then they set him up as a go-between for Clark and these like so-called hitmen. He agreed to a $10,000 fee with $5,000 up front and enclosed $200 in an envelope of earnest money. So then he was charged for criminal solicitation to commit first-degree murder. His new sentencing took place in 1996, where the jury returned a death sentence for the second time. And I guess they dropped the murder for hire charges after this because you never hear about him again.
Right.
So I guess they were like, well, he's being put to death anyways or whatever. For the next 3 years, Clark and his lawyer went back and forth appealing and deciding not to appeal and appealing and deciding not to appeal. And like Terry Clark would be like, okay, I'm ready to die. And then he would be like, never mind, I'm not ready to die. And it was just like, it went back and forth for way too long. So in March 2001, he decided he was ready to be executed again. So, and like, to me, I just think like, what a nightmare for Dina and Donita's families both. Mm-hmm. Like that they're like, okay, Finally. And then now we have to go through this again. And okay, finally. And now we have to go through this again. On September 14th, 2001, courts denied the last-ditch appeal and set Clark's execution date for November 6, 2001. His last meal was fish and shrimp from Long John Silver's. He didn't want dessert, which I feel like also speaks to his character. So if I was going to die, I'd want all the dessert. Colleen and Jeff Gore were both in attendance, as well as Donita Welch and Clark's girlfriend, Jean Ortiz, which it already creeps me out when convicted murderers have girlfriends, because it's like, he's a convicted murderer. He murdered a little girl, like, gross. But also, I guess she was part of like this like charge to like the protest, like to get him put behind bars, but then she wrote him a letter and his letter back like made her feel sorry for him or something, and so then she became his girlfriend. So his last words were, quote, 15 minutes, which left a lot of people confused. Some people thought that it meant that he got his 15 minutes of fame. Mm-hmm. But apparently there was an idea in Dead Man Walking by Sister Helen Prigine that indicated that you would be in heaven in 15 minutes after death. He was the first inmate executed in New Mexico in 41 years, and he was the last. He was the only inmate that's been executed by lethal injection. So that is the story of Terry Clark. I have another fun fact for you, though.
Okay.
The old main prison where he was executed, it was also the site of the deadly prison riot. I don't know if you remember. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's now defunct.
Yes.
But they hold ghost tours.
The Ghost Bros go there? I feel like the Ghost Bros went there.
They might have gone there. They go lots of places.
They do. It's their job.
Look. I didn't even look, but
because I feel like, I mean, they did. I know they did a prison where there was a really terrible prison riot, and so
maybe.
But I don't know if it was that one or not.
They do ghost tours. It's kind of expensive. I think I looked at it, but
yeah,
I don't know. It might be worth checking out someday.
Yeah.
So that's the end of our first episode.
All right. Yeah.
How do you feel it went?
I think it went okay.
Kind of long.
Yeah, we went a little long, but
I guess it could have been longer.
Could have been.
We didn't go on any tangents.
No, not really.
No. I guess that's good.
Stay tuned for future tangents. I'm sure once we get a little more comfortable with this, then there will be a lot more asides. But thanks for sticking in there with us on our very first recording.
Hopefully that was good. I had done like an insane amount of research to begin with, and then I felt like I didn't do it correctly, and I went back over it again.
And then we sat on it for like 2 years.
So I don't know. Hopefully everybody liked it. And we'll be back with another one.
Yep.
All right.
Not sure exactly what yet. Maybe something mysterious. Maybe another true crime case. But
we'll see.
We'll have something.
You'll have to listen to find out. Okay, I have no idea how we should end this.
Me either. We don't have like Patreons and things like that yet.
We don't have a fun tagline to say.
Nope.
Okay. Well, I guess for now we'll say goodbye. See you next time.
And remember that people are gross and don't get murdered.
That's right. Bye.